Welcome to the target stream for Mint Press News. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us again today. Despite US President Donald Trump seemingly backing down from his large-scale bombing campaign against Iranian civilian infrastructure, once again, more fronts are opening across the region, laying the groundwork for a much broader conflict. With Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and even Ukraine being potentially dragged in, we are now on the brink once again. But before we begin getting into all of that, the target stream is 100% viewer funded. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal and had our fundraisers taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to make sure that we can keep this news show alive. We can keep bringing this content to you. You can join us on Mint Press on Patreon or right here on YouTube. Join our membership program. So that being said, an enormous amount, of course, has been happening, but it appears as if the media has been downplaying a lot of what's been going on across West Asia, because right now, although the headlines are filled with Trump backing down or that Trump is in negotiations with Iran, and we're back in this cycle again, at least in the corporate media and what they are playing on their news bulletins and what they're covering in their headline articles. Something very different is taking shape in the region. And we're going to cover that, especially when it comes to the fronts, the support fronts, you could call them, for Iran in this ongoing war. Of course, the United States is also making an effort to cover up the fact that it has lost soldiers. So that's another thing that we'll be looking into a little bit more because that story is still developing. So we now have headlines filling the media going around, of course, that Trump warns Iran negotiations must lead to a quick outcome or strikes will resume. And of course, Trump is claiming that there are ongoing negotiations, that things are going to get fixed very quickly. But then he comes out with his contradictory statements every few hours, it seems like at this point, where he's, threatening and then he's going back on his threats and so forth. And a lot of people have become rather confused or tired, quite frankly, of this cycle that we're in. The reality here is that Trump, if he commits himself to a large-scale bombing campaign against Iran, then he is going to be sucked into a conflict which Iran's not going to let go of for any time in the foreseeable future. Like, it will at least last, most likely, a few months. And Trump is in a difficult position because he still has the ability to manipulate the oil market. At least he has the ability to manipulate crude oil, Brent crude futures. And that's something that appears to be happening here, where if you are to search up at any one time all of the headlines that are coming from the so-called reputable media outlets, they're all reporting that Trump backs down or Trump is in negotiations or repeating his statements. And of course, in his statements, he's claiming that we're winning, we've got this blockade on Iran, Iran is on its knees, Iran are begging for a deal, we're in very serious negotiations, etc. These are the sort of statements that Trump is frequently making. And what that does with the market is that a lot of that trading that's ongoing, when we're talking about the price of oil, normally we're talking about what Brent crude is at, Brent crude futures. A lot of that is being done by AI nowadays. So if all the headlines and what the president is saying is reflecting something other than reality, then the price of oil can drop. And that's what we've seen. It's as if this is being artificially played with. And, there's allegations as well on top of that there is some insider trading going on with this. But there is that little bit of wiggle room that the Trump administration now has with Iran and this war, where it is not forced immediately at this moment to either make the decision to pack up and leave and give up, or to go to an all-out regional war. But at the same time, they do have to be smart about what they're doing. And so they're escalating on a number of different fronts. And we're seeing that Iran is responding in kind. They are also deciding to escalate the fight on different fronts and through their allies. And this is the opportune time for some of that to be going on. But before we get more into that, just a point that should be noted here. So the Pentagon, this happened a few days back. The Pentagon took off the names of 4 of the US troops that were recently killed off of the list of Iran war deaths and put them onto a separate list. Another major development is that now it's admitting to 207 wounded. So we had last week the admission from a source at the Pentagon that around 100 US soldiers had been injured in the past few weeks. Initially, CENTCOM was claiming that there were no injuries just a few days before the Pentagon admitted to nearly 100. But we had those figures put out after, just a few days after, CENTCOM said they denied initially a attack that the Iranians carried out on a base inside of Syria in el-Mandeb. And so the Iranians claim that they killed around a dozen officials and of different ranks. CENTCOM denied it and then said there have been no injuries and no deaths. And then a few days later, well, there's nearly 100. And now we've got 207 wounded. That's what they're admitting, but they're not putting them on the Iran war casualty list. They're creating a separate category. So they're actively trying to hide from the public that they've suffered these casualties, especially in this recent back and forth in the fighting. And this, again, we have to go back because in April, the Intercept discovered that just from what they could check, 15 soldiers that were wounded in action were removed from the American casualty count. So this is something that has been ongoing throughout the war. A lot of people, they say, because I pulled up the example of the Ain al-Assad base attack back in 2020, where after the United States killed Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, that there was a retaliatory strike. The Iranians gave 30 minutes pre-warning. They used between 17 to 22 ballistic missiles of their older kind, not as sophisticated as the missiles that they have now. And the US officially, the first reaction on January 8th, I believe, by Trump was that no one was injured, no one was killed, nothing happened here, Iran backed down. That was his narrative. A few days later, there were 11 that they admitted had been injured. And then that started to multiply and multiply until we got at the end of February all the way up to 110 US service members with traumatic brain injuries. They didn't say that any other kind of injury happened, just traumatic brain injuries. And then we just have no update on what actually happened to these soldiers. So we can safely assume at this point that the United States is lying about its casualty figures. We have more than enough evidence to suggest this. Names being wiped off of lists, different lists being created, all these different numbers being floated about, blatant lies that are then debunked only days later by CENTCOM, or as I like to call it, COPCOM. And then we have all of the evidence that has emerged, this latest round that occurred, which spanned over a few weeks, where we have all of this satellite imagery that came out, and we've seen the results. A lot of the footage we've shown in the previous episodes here on these streams, we've been going through them, but it's very clear from the satellite imagery, from the footage surrounding the bases, in some cases the footage from US soldiers themselves inside of bases, that Iran's ballistic missiles are not only, they continue to be precise, but they are operating, the Iranians are operating perhaps with even better intelligence than they did before. Which, of course, has led to accusations that Russia and China may be involved, which is quite interesting because that's going to lead on to another point, which we'll cover a bit later. But before we do, I think we have to pay attention to Trump, his rhetoric and what he's saying right now, because this all factors in again to the price of oil and to artificially prop things up for now. Because right as it stands in the region, the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Bab el-Mandeb is also closed, at least for the Saudis. So in terms of the global oil supply, about 25% of it is just wiped off to one extent or another. And that, of course, it's the Yemen scenario, and all of this is newer, but that has an enormous impact. That's not something that it just simply goes away because Donald Trump says it will. But again, we have to seriously consider that with the AI and this obsession with the AI revolution, all that, Trump is making these statements frequently, and we hear these very positive, all of this rhetoric, it's very positive from the Trump administration all the time. And based upon that positive rhetoric, the prices of Brent crude go up or down. And so this gives the impression that, the oil prices are not doing that well. But at some point, something has to give. And they cannot replace this oil that has been stripped off of the market. And we're going to look at how bad things are now getting, because we're not even at the beginning of this. This is starting to get a lot more serious, and the ramifications now are going to grow for what we're seeing. So we're going to look at some of that evidence. But this is the sort of language that Trump is using.
Now, there are very friendly negotiations going on. And by the way, how good is our Navy with a blockade? Not one boat gets in. We have a blockade. They'd love us to, please, we don't want the blockade anymore. They're saying, please, please, no blockade. And I approve the single largest.
And then he moves on to another point, of course. But the way that he's talking, again, if we're to assume that there is manipulation ongoing here, then this language actually can be made sense of. And that's why we're seeing this fluctuation happen. But when it gets to the point where there's no jet fuel and you can't any longer take a flight out of whatever Heathrow Airport, then it doesn't matter what this price, this artificially inflated price, and this projection, because it's futures, this projection of the price is going to be, because the actual physical material is not there. So that's something to keep in mind. And when it comes to the strikes that the United States is threatening, it's only going to make things a hell of a lot worse. So people think, by looking at the price of oil, that perhaps the situation is not as bad as some had suggested. But of course, the knock-on effects are things that in the long run are going to really impact everyone in their pockets. That being said, one of the new developments that has just occurred, because Saudi Arabia is now back at war with Yemen, as we've covered in the previous episodes, it's the fact that the largest oil processing plant in Saudi Arabia was subjected to a successful drone attack. Now, Saudi Arabia initially blamed the Islamic resistance in Iraq, which is allied with Iran, for this. But the Islamic resistance in Iraq actually came out, released a statement saying that they did not carry out this attack. Whoever did it, it doesn't really matter at this point, because these fires have been tracked by NASA firm and NASA firms, and the satellite imagery has provided us evidence that you can see this from space, the results of the attack. And this is just a drone attack. So that's something that we should keep in mind, just to pull up these images here. We've got them individually. And evidence, again, that these attacks have been ongoing. Some have suggested that the reason why there has been accusations by Saudi Arabia that this attack came from Iraq is because it enables them not to have to respond against Yemen. Because if you have been following what Yemen has been doing, the Yemeni armed forces responded to Saudi's attack last week on Hodeidah by going after oil infrastructure around Yanbu and taking out targets around Jazan. And in doing that, of course, it impacts Saudi's ability to export gas. So here's an official statement that came from the Yemeni armed forces. This is announcing these attacks. And then we'll take a look at some of the results and the sort of inferno that was created as a result of this retaliatory action that was taken by Yemen. This is the Ansar Allah government in Sana'a.
الرحمن الرحيم قال تعالى ذلك ومن عاقب بمثل ما عوقب به ثم بغي عليه لينصرنه الله إن الله لعفو غفور صدق الله العظيم. إمعانا من نظام العدو السعودي في حصار الشعب اليمني وانتهاكا جديدا لسيادة الجمهورية اليمنية، أقدم العدو السعودي بالعدوان الإجرامي الظالم بعدد من الغارات الجوية ليلة أمس على مدينة الحديدة ومينائها وجزيرة كمران، وأدت تلك الغارات إلى أضرار مادية ومعنوية. وقد اشتبكت الدفاعات الجوية مع تشكيل من طائرات العدو بعد اختراق الأجواء، ومنعتها من ارتكاب مزيد من الجرائم بحق هذا الشعب العظيم. وردا على هذا العدوان الإجرامي السافر، نفذت القوات المسلحة اليمنية عمليتين عسكريتين نوعيتين، استهدفت الأولى أهدافا حساسة لمنشآت تتبع شركة أرامكو في جيزان، وذلك بعشرات الصواريخ البالستية والطائرات المسيرة. فيما استهدفت العملية الثانية أهدافا حساسة تتبع شركة أرامكو في ينبع، وذلك بعدد من الصواريخ البالستية والمجنحة والطائرات المسيرة. وحققت العمليتان أهدافهما بنجاح بفضل الله تعالى، وكانت الإصابات دقيقة ومباشرة. إن هذا التصعيد في العدوان ليؤكد مدى إصرار العدو السعودي على مواصلة حصاره لشعبنا وانتهاك سيادة بلدنا، وهو ما لا يمكن القبول به، وسيتصدى له شعبنا الحر المؤمن المجاهد بكل حزم وبكل قوة. إننا في القوات المسلحة اليمنية وبعد التوكل على الله ملتزمون بأداء واجبنا في الدفاع المشرف والمسؤول عن بلدنا العزيز وعن شعبنا الأصيل، شعب الإيمان والحكمة، شعب الإسلام والعروبة. ولن يجد منا هذا العدو المجرم إلا التصدي والمواجهة من موقع الحق، وهو في موقع الباطل. إن الباطل كان زهوقا. ونؤكد أن فرض الحصار البحري على العدو السعودي لا يزال مستمرا ردا على عدوانه المقابل وحصاره الظالم المستمر منذ 12 عاما، ولن نتردد في توسيع تحركاتنا وتصعيد خطواتنا استنادا إلى تطورات الموقف خلال الساعات والأيام المقبلة، وذلك ضمن معادلة الحصار بالحصار والتصعيد بالتصعيد. والله حسبنا ونعم الوكيل.
So that is a statement by the spokesperson for the Yemeni armed forces. Of course, you won't see that on the Western corporate media. Here's footage from one of those retaliatory strikes of the aftermath that was filmed in Saudi Arabia. So everyone's aware of what that was looking like for people. And from the initial retaliatory strikes that were carried out on ARAMCO facilities in Jizan, it seemed like they targeted fuel storage, oil storage sites. Those fires we can still see from space are continuing to burn. So these are significant attacks that impact Saudi Arabia's ability to continue exporting oil and gas. And something that is of note here is that, and this is something that's recently been covered by the Wall Street Journal, is that, and it's good because it has the trade routes here. If you see here, typically what Saudi Arabia was able to do, which the likes of Qatar and Bahrain, for example, and Kuwait, they don't have the ability to do, is that they were able to sort of circumvent the need to use the Strait of Hormuz by going through Yemen, and through this port, they would, of course, deliver their oil through Bab el-Mandeb, and then they could transport it towards Asia. Now, because of Ansar-Allah's blockade, Bab el-Mandeb is closed for them. Another step that could be taken, because as you can see here, the alternative route, which is much longer, it requires using the Suez Canal, going through the Mediterranean, and then heading all the way around Africa. You have to circle the entire continent, and then heading towards Asia. It's a lot longer, it's a lot more expensive, of course, but Ansar-Allah could double down on this strategy and decide to prevent them from using this trade route as well. So what we're looking at now is that Saudi Arabia has been strangled from both sides. So not only has it been strangled, but it's being attacked at its ports directly. It's taking direct hits, and it's taking direct hits to its air bases as well. And we're in a situation here where Saudi is there's a stranglehold on Saudi. So the Strait of Hormuz is closed, Bab el-Mandeb is closed. 25% of global oil supplies have been put on lockdown. And that is happening as in Saudi Arabia, their largest oil processing facility was just targeted with drones and taken out. And this potentially could be just the very beginning of this. This is something that we haven't even seen this reach its climax. What we could see is that it gets a hell of a lot worse. Now, we also see cope from the Israeli media. So they say that Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq were all attacked by drones. Now, it's not clear that drones were fired from Iraq towards occupied Palestine, but the Israeli air defenses weren't taking any chances. And so they reported that they backed down, they shot down these drones. Now, in this report, they're saying Iran-backed Houthis, they're mentioning here, but the actual identity of the drones that attacked Jordan, that were heading towards Jordan, and Saudi Arabia haven't been fully identified. But regardless, in this report, they claim that Saudi Arabia has stated that they shot down those drones. And again, this is just another case of the US and its allies lying, because Saudi Arabia did not shoot down those drones. They successfully targeted, again, this processing site in Baqaiq, it's called, which I'll just pull this up here. And the reason why there's been some confusion about who actually hit this is because, as you can see, the location here, right here, is much obviously closer to Iran and to Iraq as well. And the implications of Yemen hitting this site are quite great. So this means that obviously if Yemen hit this area and went after their oil facilities there, then their air defenses failed even as those drones passed Riyadh. So this is something that has to be taken very seriously. And of course, the Saudis deny, like the Kuwaiti government, the Bahrainis, and everyone else in the region constantly deny. I mean, Jordan recently denied they even have US bases in their country, despite the fact that they were getting pummeled, and US soldiers, of course, they admitted that 3 US soldiers were killed in these bases, or at least in one of those bases inside of Jordanian territory. But there's been a lot of lying, a lot of cover-ups that have been ongoing. Of course, Saudi Arabia, its proxy forces inside of Yemen have been clashing directly with Ansar-Allah as well. So there's been fighting on the ground that's been happening. We've also seen announcements for the first time in a while now, in many months, from the so-called Sovereign Transitional Council. And again, when I have been talking about Yemen and trying to explain it in previous live streams, a lot of people are talking about, oh, you know, the Houthis, they're Iran-backed and they're a proxy, they're not the internationally recognized government. Well, the so-called internationally recognized government, which, you know, the president of Yemen, who is literally based in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the enemy country, you'll see that Saudi Arabia had this fight with the United Arab Emirates because the Sovereign Transitional Council, because there were two groups inside of Yemen, in the south of Yemen. Let's pull up the map again. It makes this better, this demonstration. So in the south of Yemen, in Aden, there was a power sharing agreement between two different groups, the Emirati proxies and the Saudi proxies. Now, the Emirati proxies, the reason I'm pulling this up, it's important to note about the conflict here, is that the Emirati proxies, they tried to push and take territory over further in the east of the country. They bought off a lot of local groups, and they started attacking and fighting and trying to seize territory. And they tried to also seize territory and push out the Saudi-backed forces from Aden. Saudi Arabia didn't like this too much, pushed back against the United Arab Emirates, and there was sort of this, you know, soft war between them, I guess. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where they sort of had a media clash. They were going at it. And Saudi Arabia, because it is undoubtedly more powerful than the United Arab Emirates, managed to push out the Sovereign Transitional Council forces, the STC, and sort of make them disappear. You know, we were told for years that the STC is an organic movement, and it's completely, you know, this is the will of a large portion of the Yemeni population, and then Saudi Arabia extinguishes it, what appears to be just getting rid of it overnight. But those forces, of course, that were aligned with the United Arab Emirates, although they went quiet, Saudi got its way inside of Yemen. Those forces that were aligned with the STC, those UAE proxy forces, are still there inside of Yemen. So they've popped back up and made a bunch of declarations against Ansarullah suddenly because, suddenly Ansarullah does something against Saudi. Saudi has come together and sort of tried to reconcile with the United Arab Emirates. And hey, what do you know? The internationally recognized government is back with its allies, its STC proxies. These guys are suddenly back. We're hearing from them again. There's statements coming out from them. And so everyone knows the STC, their those hardline fighters, their best fighters, are all Salafists, which really what we're saying here is these are people that were formerly part of either Al-Qaeda or Daesh. So ISIS fighters, right? And Al-Qaeda aligned fighters. So they're being pulled out to fight against Ansarullah now. They've suddenly appeared again because Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are like, yeah, let's, bury the past. Now we're fighting Ansarullah and we need to focus on Yemen. And now suddenly we've heard about the STC again after they disappeared because it's all about money and bribery and paying people off. And they're not actually genuine. I mean, the so-called presidential council and the president, the internationally recognized president, which wasn't voted for by anybody in Yemen. And we've covered this on the stream before. He's based in Saudi Arabia, and it's just utterly ridiculous. But we have clashes on the ground now, and the STC are back, right? Suddenly, the internationally recognized government. Oh, who could guess? The guys that go away when the UAE tell them to go away, come back when the UAE tells them to come back because they're getting closer with Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is being pushed to go further with Ansarullah because, of course, Ansarullah is a card in this war that if Iran is going to fight this war and is going to go to a massive escalation in the region, you definitely want Ansarullah to open up a front at some point. It's also the opportune time for them because they have been under an illegal, immoral blockade since 2015, which has caused the deaths of around 400,000 people inside of Yemen. So this is an opportunity for Ansarullah to finally try and get justice, to try and liberate their country, to try and fight back against the Saudis and force an agreement to come about that is favorable to them and their country, and perhaps to unite the country. We don't know about that. There would probably be some sort of power sharing agreement which would be reached. But this appears to be the time. And it's the worst time for Donald Trump, because now it's put a greater stranglehold on. So Trump can tell the world that he's in negotiations and the Iranians want a deal. But the reality is he's not firing anymore on the south of Iran. And these strikes, of course, were bringing on massive retaliatory attacks from the Iranians. He's no longer firing on sovereign Iran, but Iran still has a chokehold over the Strait of Hormuz. Sure, the Americans are not allowing Iranian vessels to pass, but nothing is passing through the Strait of Hormuz. So the Strait of Hormuz is on lockdown. And now we've added, since the American escalation against Iran, we've added Bab el-Mandeb. So what's happened is they're just tightening the noose again and again economically. And Trump is, coming out with all his ridiculous statements and talking about how we destroyed the whole coast and the rest of it. And of course, he knows that he's full of it. This has nothing to do with reality. So now, out of absolute desperation, what are we hearing? We're hearing a number of different things. Number one, we're hearing a lot about the possibility of using Kurdish militia groups in northern Iraq to invade Iran. And there's a lot that started emerging about this, that they wanted to use these forces to invade Iranian territory from the West, the dumbest possible idea. Not only are they fighting against the terrain of Iran, because it's this mountainous terrain that sort of guards Iran's borders here, but these groups are just not capable of fighting and taking on the Iranian military. And as a result, the Iranian armed forces announced that their special forces units conducted around a dozen cross-border operations against these groups. And now what we've seen is massive strikes against Erbil and Sulaymaniyah, these two areas, these bases for the Kurdish opposition groups inside of Iraq. And the Iranians have not stopped smashing these sites belonging to the Kurdish opposition groups, because again, they're not waiting around for these groups to be triggered. But as we'll talk about a bit more, it's an act of desperation. So here's literally earlier on today, more Iranian strikes. They have been taking out weapons depots. They have been knocking out their bases. They have been assassinating middle and high-ranking members of these Kurdish Iranian opposition groups that are operating out of Iraq. And by the way, in this area, the Israelis were operating bases. This is something that people had speculated for a while, but this was proven during the 40-day war period that the Israelis actually set up their bases here. And by the way, when you come to Iraqi Kurdistan, this region, there's a lot of security checks that are ongoing there. They want to know who is in this area and who's not. They want to ensure. So there's a lot of checkpoints. Without a doubt, the authorities there would have known what was going on to a certain extent, but just turned a blind eye. So the Iranians know this, and they have been preparing by launching massive strikes, which comes to the detriment of these groups, because the Trump administration has been openly speaking about using them against Iran. Then we have another development, because in the north of the Caspian Sea, an Iranian vessel was struck, killing one on board. So that's something as well. And now Iran is officially, Abbas Araghchi has officially warned that Iran is going to retaliate and called this attack from the Ukrainians as an Israeli, an attack that was at the desire of the Israelis, and that because it's a violation of the UN Charter, it cannot go unanswered. So this, again, it drags in another element to all of this that we should keep in mind, because as Iran has its allies, and they have taken the opportunity. In the case of Yemen, Yemen actually has something to gain from going at Saudi Arabia at this point and putting the pressure on the United States and the collective West in general by attacking Saudi and trying to, demand its rights and take back control of its country and the blockade, all of that. That actually makes sense for it. But strategically speaking, for the Ukrainians, this is actually what the behavior of a proxy looks like. This is the actual behavior of a proxy, because what would be the incentive to do this at this time, at this specific time? Now, if this just happened randomly and it was a mistake, let's say, okay, let's consider it was a mistake. Well, that's one thing, right? But this was not a mistake. They've gone after an Iranian tanker. And part of that, I believe, is a message to Iran that they're willing to open up this war on different fronts in order to try and mess with Iran's trade routes. Because you have a corridor that runs down, of course, from Russia through Iran and then downwards. And also you have the middle corridor that runs here through Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan is also a hostile state. And the Americans have been attempting to force their will in the region. But what they're trying to do here, and we saw when the United States started launching their strikes on Iran initially, there were some attacks up in the northeast of the country on rail infrastructure, because of course the Iranians not being able to use the Strait of Hormuz to export their gas, what they've done instead is they've been able to use the rail infrastructure. They've been able to use other trade routes in order to get around the fact that the United States has imposed its blockade on top of Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. So the Americans are threatening that they will pull this card, in essence. That's what appears to be the case here with Ukraine deciding to target this Iranian tanker. So there's the issue of trying to use the Kurdish forces as your ground force, trying to involve Ukraine in this war. And then, of course, as well, we've heard more now, although Syria's so-called president, Ahmed al-Shara, or Abu Muhammad al-Julani, depending upon what you like to call him, because people get very, very angry about what we're calling the current leader of Syria. And I say the so-called current leader because he doesn't have any sovereignty. He's sort of being bullied and pushed around by foreign powers. He has no say over what's happening, really. And he gave a speech saying that I'm not going to order an invasion of Lebanon, but I'm going to work with Lebanon, right, against Hezbollah. And Trump has been pushing and saying, oh, yeah, Julani can do the job. He'll do it much better than the Israelis. We've covered what that would bring and the sectarian war that would cause. But the reason why I'm focusing in again on this is because there are forces that have amassed along the Lebanon-Syria border, and it's a massive gamble that is being taken. They're taking a gamble with saying, well, we're going to involve Ukraine. We're going to try and mess up your different trade corridors that you have all surrounding you. We're going to use the Kurds to try and fight you. We're going to use the Syrians to take care of Lebanese Hezbollah. Now, all of these things could blow up in their faces. And again, that's why we see hesitancy with all of these strategies, and they won't commit to anything 100%. It's always a little bit here, a little bit there, withdraw, full back. Because ultimately, if Syria tries to invade Lebanese territory, or by Syria, I mean the sectarian militia groups, many of whom are like Afghans and all of that, they'll send them in there, of course. If they try to invade and with the order of kill the Shia, which will likely be, what's going to happen, or those, I don't know, they'll get the tribes to come down. Some of the more independent militant groups and whatever, and then they'll claim that they're being dragged in from there. I don't know exactly how they want to do it. But if they want to do that, immediately what's going to happen, the Iraqis are going to come in. They'll probably come in from Abu Kamal and try and seize Deir ez-Zor, and then set up supply routes. And they might even go further than that. So you have the Iraqis instantly involved. You could end up with a situation where Hezbollah might actually get the upper hand on the Syrian forces, who are not well trained, who are not well disciplined, and are not prepared, do not have strategic weapons. They might end up getting the upper hand with them, and you never know. You might see them going all the way up to Latakia and seizing territory here, not in terms of let's say alliance with these militia groups, but with the acquiescence of groups inside of Syria, because everyone is armed inside of Syria. You could see that Hezbollah go and implement a policy at that point of locking off the coast, so Syria is landlocked. And I'm not saying that this will absolutely happen, but these are all possibilities. And the way that the Americans and the Israelis are going on about all of this is so ridiculously stupid. And these are massive gambles they're taking all over the region. So if you're messing, for instance, in the Caspian Sea, if you're messing with trade routes here, well, this also impacts Turkey, which, of course, Trump is a big fan of, Erdogan. And he loves them so much, and he wants to sell them his F-35s. Well, they want to become like this regional trade hub, and that middle corridor is a very big part of that. They want that to work. They want the trade coming through from China. They want this trade route to be stable and secure. They don't want a conflict in this area, because if they get a conflict, then that's going to be destabilizing. And also, Azerbaijan, people don't realize this, but Azerbaijan, the Azeri population of Iran, there's a very large population. Even Khamenei was part Azeri, right? And some people speculate that, well, they might want to do, some sort of cross-border mission, work with separatist forces, and they could try and go that route and attack Iran there and work with separatist organizations. And the reason why I believe they haven't yet done this, because of course this could present some sort of a danger. Number one, the Iranian population in Iranian Azerbaijan, they're for the most part actually patriotic to their country. They don't want to, they're not on board with the separatist movement. But also what could happen is it could backfire, because their population is majority Shia. There's many people sympathetic to Iran in Azerbaijan. And suddenly, if that explodes, forget even overthrowing the regime. We're talking about a situation where if they take out oil and gas facilities there, the Israelis get a large chunk of their cheap energy supply from Azerbaijan. And of course, then it's transported through Turkey, and they transport it down to the Israelis. And so they get cheap energy from Azerbaijan. And they've got really good relations. And they also sell a lot of weapons to Azerbaijan. That's another thing. The edge that Azerbaijan had over Armenia came in large part to do with Israeli weapons that were used against Armenia during the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. So all of these different fronts that the Americans think that they can open, and the Israelis would like to open as well, they all have unintended consequences that could come of these actions. And that's likely why we're seeing them not commit 100%, because Iran has a lot of cards, even in terms of Iran's own ground forces. If you push them enough and you start taking out their civilian infrastructure like Trump is threatening, going after their power plants, going after their oil facilities, their nuclear sites, their bridges, all of this stuff, then it's not out of the question that there could be some more cross-border operations, but this time into Kuwait to take out American positions. We've heard speculation that that could happen. Again, I'm not saying that it's guaranteed, but Iran has the options. Not many people have considered that Iran can do attacks on the ground in the Persian Gulf. Now, it'll be very costly. They don't have an air force to back them up. In fact, they're going to be fighting against the US, targeting them. But special forces operations are things that perhaps they could pull off. I'm not saying that they're going to do a full-scale ground invasion of Kuwait. That's not something that I think would be on the books. You never know. But that being said, the Americans are being pushed back from their bases in Bahrain, in Kuwait. They're pushing them all westwards. We even saw that in Jordan, where they started eliminating these bases and forcing the Americans to bring all of their jets and their drones, all their assets into Israeli bases. They're forcing them all westwards. And now there's been a lull in the direct fighting, but what's happened is Ansar Allah has picked up on that. They've basically been targeting, of course, Saudi facilities. And then in retaliation as well, it's quite embarrassing for the Saudis. We've also seen that today Ansar Allah has been shooting down drones. So one of these drones was actually a Turkish drone. This is some of the footage that was published by Ansar Allah of them downing this Turkish drone, which the Saudis used. And as a result of this, the reconnaissance that the Saudis were doing and violating Yemeni airspace, Ansar Allah decided to launch a retaliatory drone strike, and they did, and they carried out that strike successfully, from what we can see. And there were new targets burning. We'll look at that in a minute. But here you're seeing the air defenses of Ansar Allah take out that drone. So now this front is active. Iran doesn't even need to fire a missile. It's got the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, closed. Ansar Allah is smashing Saudi targets, taking out its oil infrastructure. Here's some more footage that emerged from this morning. I believe this is in Jizan. And again, these are catastrophic scenes. And, you know, what we haven't actually seen from footage on the ground, we're also seeing from space, because these fires are raging on. Meanwhile, the US media, of course, last week prior to, I think on Friday, a segment came out. They've been salivating over the idea of targeting Iranian civilian infrastructure because, of course, before the weekend, everybody hyped up Trump's threats to launch a large-scale attack on Iran. And here's some of what we got. This is the U.S. media doing their thing.
The power plants and places that we might be able to hit. Lucas, as you see these as targets, what do you think we might hit first?
Well, I don't know if we'll hit it first, but the Damavad plant supplies 40% of Tehran's electricity. The Bashir nuclear power plant, probably not likely a target. The Russians built this. They still supply Iran with low-enriched uranium.
Because, Lucas, we should say there's a risk to blowing up a nuclear plant.
There's no question. Now, the South Pars gas field, this sits on the largest natural gas field in the world. Israeli forces hit this on March 18th, in the beginning of the war. Iran responded by hitting the Qatari side of this natural gas field. In terms of targets...
But let me ask you, here, this is the Strait.
Yeah, this is the Strait of Hormuz right here.
If we want to send a message in the Strait where they're hitting ships in the Strait, wouldn't that be a place we go?
It would. The only question is what would be Iran's response. We've seen Iran hit back in Qatar's oil field, natural gas oil fields in the UAE.
So this is just insanity that segments like this exist. I mean, what do we expect from Fox News? But they're just, giddy talking about potential civilian targets that they're going to hit. And the fact that this can exist still, because we've seen them, get very happy about targeting civilian sites in other areas in the region and taking out this, taking out that. Perhaps not as excited as they seem to be here. But they, in general, they're very excited, especially at Fox News, about the prospect of bombing a Middle Eastern country. But it's like they don't understand the concept of, there is a power balance. And in this equation, it's not like Iraq. You don't have this flat terrain which you can just roll in and reach Baghdad in one day and overthrow the government. Like, you are fighting a country that will obliterate your bases, that has destroyed a large chunk of your radars throughout the region. So your early warning systems have been gotten rid of. Your air defense batteries have been taken out systematically. You've lost helicopters. According to Iran, they took out an F-15 fighter jet while it was on a runway or in a hangar, I believe. And they've taken out countless MQ-9 drones. And so they're losing all of this equipment. They're losing soldiers. They're covering up their casualties, as we covered at the start of this stream. They're obviously lying about their casualties. And now they're coming up with all these crazy ideas about what to do. So, we're going to, maybe the US, Trump was saying today that we're going to get involved in the war in Yemen. Well, you did that before. You launched an operation that went around a month and a half. You used your B-2s, your B-52s, all of that. You used your strategic bombers, and you didn't have the same kind of air defenses to deal with in that case like you do in Iran. And you know what happened? You didn't do anything. Ansarullah was still imposing the blockade on the Red Sea, not allowing Israel-linked ships to head to the Israeli-occupied port of Eilat or Rashash. Yeah. So there is just, with this, it's like they don't compute that it's not that simple. Because if it was that simple, it's as simple as going and taking Kharg Island with what, 10,000 troops, you're going to take an Iranian island, and then you're just going to be subjected to constant drone and missile fire. And then what? How many deaths are you going to cover up? How are you going to cover up this catastrophe? You want to get Ukraine involved now. You wanted the Kurds to be involved on your behalf. And by the way, again, that Kurdish regional government in northern Iraq, because it's sort of the north of Iraq is like they call it Iraqi Kurdistan, right? And in this region, you have the Kurdish regional government that's there. Now, in the event that there was an actual cross-border operation from Kurdish militant groups to go across the Iranian border, Iran could simply take out that Kurdish regional government as well, could go after everything. This is an enormous gamble that they're taking here. It's something that it's not well thought out. And when they're talking in this way and they're deciding that, oh, well, we're going to talk about hitting this site and that. Well, you haven't even figured out yet what you're going to do in terms of combating all of Iran's allies in the axis of resistance and how you're going to manage the fight. You don't know anything about what you're supposed to be doing, how you're going to fight this war. You just have these flare-ups. You ditch a memorandum of understanding that you reached, which makes it way more difficult to reach another agreement with the Iranians. And you're just waiting in limbo as Iran continues to put a chokehold on the global oil supply, and you have to continue to dig into your strategic reserves. And then you're using your AI technology to manipulate the market, to make it appear as if it's not as bad as it truly is. And we're all waiting for the fallout here. That's the situation as it stands. And still, we're seeing, regardless of whether the Iraqis carried out action today against Saudi Arabia, which we've seen them do in the past, by the way, whether it was them or not, we do know that they downed an MQ-9 drone. So we have footage of them downing a drone in Iraq. So this was over the Babel governorate, I believe, that this was filmed in. So we're seeing that the fronts are ready to activate. At any moment, Lebanon could flare up. It appears as if Hezbollah is preparing for what is coming its way in terms of the domestic situation and also a possible invasion from Syria, which it's clear Hezbollah is not going to take any risks with that, is going to address it. But that is, in essence, Iran's ground force against the Israelis. But if this current situation continues, the Israelis are going to have to get involved at some point. And the Israelis right now, quite frankly, even though the air defense system was being taken out, which will make it more difficult for them to combat Iranian ballistic missiles, with their own air defense munitions being, supplied by the United States, but being severely drained, they're in a predicament where they're looking at this. And we heard Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, the Israeli finance minister, talk about it bluntly. Why should we get involved in this war that we started and is all for us? Let the Americans fight and die in our war. Let them die for us, right? Let them fight. So the Israelis are sitting back right now. But if the United States wants to launch a large-scale attack on Iranian civilian infrastructure, it's very clear that Iran will escalate against the Israelis as well, inevitably, but that they will sort of need that help from the Israelis. And most likely, they're going to call in more favors with different allies and proxies to help them get across the line here, because they do appear as if they're exhausted, that they're operationally exhausted, the American force. And also, you've got a bunch of people and their hearts are just not in this, because the soldiers themselves know that they're there fighting a war for Israel. They themselves know that this is for Israel. And then I'm sure they see these clips like of Bezalel Smotrich, some of those soldiers at the very least. And so they're there with no air defenses, while the Israelis actually do have some air defenses still. They're getting pounded. Their positions are getting blown to pieces. And they're having to fight this war. And if they launch a large-scale bombing campaign, what is the difference? What's the difference going to be? We know that Trump's own intelligence agencies have assessed that a large-scale bombing campaign against Iranian civilian infrastructure is not going to change their negotiating stance. And we're not even discussing that Iran is going to bow down. We're talking about negotiations still and going to the negotiation table. How many more times will the Iranians actually appear at the negotiating table? Because I can guarantee that Abbas Araghchi and Pezeshkian, these types, the reformists as they're known, who are now, they were voted in the Iranian government, they for sure will entertain negotiations no matter what. Like, it's actually crazy how much they will take and still go back to the negotiations. But the rest of Iran is not necessarily, the Iranian system is not necessarily behind them in this. They need something solid. So the US is going to have to face a decision. Either you run away, like you get out of the region, you clear out, and you don't have to directly announce that you've lost, but you have to clear out the region. You have to depart. And, if you want to sign some kind of deal with the Iranians and make it an unofficial deal, not an official one, sort of like Biden did, by the way, because I don't know if anyone remembers, but before everything went down with October 7 and Operation Al-Aqsa Flood against the Israelis in 2023, earlier in that year, the Biden administration, its big goal was to bring the Saudis along to normalize with the Israelis. And the Saudis were very close to normalizing ties with the Israelis. That was very clear. We knew that that was going to happen. It was almost inevitable. And of course, that got stopped after what happened in Gaza. But part of that calculation there, when they were doing this, was that Iran, perhaps there could be tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And Iran could perhaps take some measures and intervene and try and do some things to dissuade Saudi from going that route. Because, of course, it's a massive blow to the Palestinians doing this. Not that the Palestinian Authority cares at all, because, they're taking money from the Saudis. So, Mahmoud Abbas in the Palestinian Authority, the unelected dictator of the normalizing proxy force in the West Bank for Israel, his boys will go to Saudi Arabia and suck up to the Saudis. So, not a blow to them. They don't care so much. they've just given up anything like the whole mission of what was the PLO before, which now is owned by the PA because they've taken it over and hijacked it, all of that. Those guys don't care. But the Palestinian people, of course, would be hit by this. This breaks up what was known as the Arab Peace Initiative, which was sort of forwarded by the Saudis and sort of propelled by the Saudis. And the Arab Peace Initiative was that we're not recognizing the Israelis until there is a two-state solution and the Palestinians have a viable state. And then at that point, we'll fully normalize ties and establish diplomatic and whatever else from there, right? Of course, Lebanon has now gone ahead and not cared about that because it's a U.S. proxy regime. But Saudi Arabia held off and maintained that position. It seemed like it was going to change back in 2023, earlier in 2023. But anyway, the point of all of this is that back then, the Biden administration went to Iran. It couldn't actually negotiate an Iran nuclear deal because the Israel lobby was applying so much pressure to this Biden administration, led by, of course, a vegetable as a president at the time. And that pressure that was being applied made it untenable to achieve a proper return to what was the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal. They couldn't get back to it like Biden pledged during his campaign. So what they did is they did a prisoner exchange, and then they released Iranian frozen assets. They started releasing them. So it was an unofficial deal that was struck between Iran and the United States, where the sanctions wouldn't be applied in the same way. They might not take all those sanctions off, but they wouldn't be applied in the same way. They would get assets back. They did a mutual prisoner exchange, and the deal was not like a formal nuclear deal, but it was something that took pressure off. And part of that calculation for the Biden administration that motivated that was the idea of Saudi Arabia normalizing with the Israelis. And one of the reasons why they wanted this normalization to happen so desperately is because they wanted a new trade route, which would go through Saudi territory, involve the UAE as well, and up through Jordan, and then through occupied Palestine to Europe. They wanted to revive a old trade route and known as the Hijaz Railway, right? They wanted to revive this route, and Saudi normalization was going to be key in organizing this. So it was like a crowning achievement that the Biden administration wanted to do. So the Trump administration could try to do something like that, perhaps, and just withdraw its forces from the region. But again, the question is, why hasn't he already done that? Because that would be the logical conclusion here. I mean, the memorandum of understanding didn't work. It didn't turn out. The Israelis have such a stranglehold on the Trump administration. You have to ask yourself, hey, maybe there's something to those Epstein files, and maybe there's some videos and there's some information that we haven't yet seen that's a lot worse than what we've seen, right? Maybe there's some files that are a lot worse and a lot more damning, and they have some evidence on Trump, because it is literally unexplainable how ridiculous the pandering to Israel that we see going on, down to like stupid things, down to like petty little things that the Israelis are angry at, which leads me to the next point here. So the International Criminal Court voted, and they got rid of Karim Khan. And by the way, just so everyone knows, Karim Khan was the pick of the UK and the Americans initially to be the head of the International Criminal Court. He's not actually somebody that the Americans opposed to begin with, and the United Kingdom opposed. Although the United States, and this is their big claim at the moment, that they are not a party to what's called the Rome Statute. And the Rome Statute governs the International Criminal Court, right? So if you're a signatory to the Rome Statute, then you are bound by the court, or you're supposed to be bound by the court. Of course, some just simply do not care, because when Israel is tried, then they just ignore it, right? ICC rulings no longer matter. But the reason why I'm pulling this up is not to actually talk about the former chief prosecutor who was pushed out. But to look at what is happening now with Venezuela and today Chad as well, decided to quit. They resigned from the Rome Statute. They no longer want to be a signatory to the Rome Statute. And of course, Venezuela is just now, unfortunately, a proxy regime of the United States, held hostage by the US. Literally, their president is held in a cell by the United States, right? Maduro was kidnapped, and we just sort of sweep past that like nothing happened, right? And then they sort of got this government as their proxy now. It's clear that they bought out the government there, and there was a lot of corruption that went into that. But Venezuela has left, Chad has left, a bunch of other countries. They want all these countries in Latin America and Africa to withdraw from the Rome Statute, right, of the International Criminal Court. And the whole point in this, the whole point, is that the International Criminal Court, for once, went after somebody who is of the West, a leader of the West, right, in the West. So they issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and, of course, his defense minister at the time, Yoav Gallant. And Israel, being as petty as they do, because there's all these allegations about them blackmailing and intimidating Fatou Bensouda, who was the former prosecutor of the ICC before Karim Khan came in and was just pushed out. But all of these allegations started coming out about sexual misconduct. Now, I have no idea about, I'm not going to sit here and deny these things, but it's interesting. It's interesting that it came out right after that time and this pressure started coming on. And it, if it was in fact true, and they cleared the charges, I believe they cleared him of the charges. But if in fact these things had any truth to them, the timing is, very much coincidental, let's say. But I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that. Quite frankly, I haven't looked into it deep enough to know the ins and outs of the case specifically. However, I mean, considering Israel's track record with the ICC, now Israel was obviously bothered by the ICC, right? So now they need Venezuela's captured shell of a regime to withdraw from the Rome Statute. Because, of course, Maduro endorsed the ICC's arrest warrants against Netanyahu. Venezuela had closed down all diplomatic ties and relations with the Israelis, accused them of genocide, and now Venezuela, of course, is just captured, and it's not even worth noting, unfortunately, what it's become now. But that being said, they're now trying to tear apart the International Criminal Court, and the U.S. is leading the charge, right? It's not the Israelis that are there telling Venezuela to withdraw from the Rome Statute. And then you hear these ridiculous explanations, like from the Venezuelans, right? This is what really gets me, is like, the explanation that is now being given from, Chad and Venezuela and the others is, it's too biased against the global South. The reason why you're doing this is because the ICC, the first time it decides to issue arrest warrants against the wishes of the United States and the collective West, the first time it does it, all of you guys are resigning and you're saying, it's so biased. But for all these years, the International Criminal Court was going, and it had the nickname, people used to joke about it because it was so bad in terms of the bias for so many years. People used to call it the African Criminal Court because it would literally just go after warlords in Africa for the most part. I'm not saying everyone, but for the most part, it was not going after anybody of any consequence. It didn't go and try and issue an arrest warrant for George Bush for invading Iraq or something. No. So the second the International Criminal Court goes out because there's the International Court of Justice, which is an organ of the United Nations, which goes and it will convict a state, for instance, of genocide, whereas the International Criminal Court goes after like leaders, like individuals. And so the United States sanctions these officials, goes after them, pulls out their bank accounts, and then gets all of its proxies to come and argue these stupid arguments. Where were these arguments by all of these proxies back when they actually made sense? Because now the prominent case at the ICC is about Israel and is about Benjamin Netanyahu. So all of this is the United States, the Trump administration, being pushed by the lobby to go after, to use literally, imagine the amount of like the amount of time that is wasted going to like your buddies in Venezuela, you know, who are on your payroll, or in Chad going to, hey, resign from the, you know, say that you're no longer a signatory of the Rome Statute because we've got this project going on. The fact that they waste time doing this, because it's not Trump at the ICC, right? But they just want to destroy it because it dared issue an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. So they're like, ICC is not legitimate. It doesn't, but they were all for the ICC when the ICC issued an arrest warrant immediately. Very, very quickly, there was an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin with the Ukraine invasion very, very, very quickly, all endorsing that. But then suddenly everyone's got a problem and it's like, oh, it's biased against the global South. What a ridiculously pathetic argument to make at a time like this, when it actually did something that it's supposed to do for once. That's the degree of control they have in the United States. The degree of control where somebody like Laura Loomer can get somebody fired, like losers, like, you know, in the media space who don't actually know anything, are just like, all they do and function as are people that just love Israel. That's it. They don't care about anything else. And they're talking about Islamic extremism and terrorism and all of that stuff. And then these people can get officials fired in the Trump. These people can get officials fired in the Trump administration. They can get people arrested upon arriving in airports. We've had Max Blumenthal before arrested coming back to the United States. Like, that's the amount of pull these people have to, like, small little things that they'll go and they'll get ICE agents to arrest somebody for saying free Palestine at a university. The Trump administration will threaten to withdraw funds from Ivy League colleges. It's just like a ridiculous amount of attention to detail of, like, imagine the amount of time wasted that is to do with this pro-Israel stuff in favor of the Israelis that the Trump administration has done. Like, most of the stuff that you hear about the Trump administration involves something about Israel. It's like, are you the government of the United States or are you the government of Israel? Why doesn't Trump just go and put a Trump hotel in Tel Aviv and live there? Like at this point, and you know, Marco Rubio and Hegseth and all the rest of them. I mean, it would be more like accurate, right? They should probably have their offices there and move, right? Or maybe declare Washington, D.C. like Israeli territory, maybe. Something like that. Like, just so we can be honest and we know we're on a level playing field here, because it's just so ridiculous. And again, there is no reason, there's no justification for the United States when it comes to this war to continue to be fighting it. There's none. Nobody wants it. Nobody defends it. The only people defending it are like these low IQ sycophants. Like, there's nobody defending this war at this point, or pro-Israel people. That nobody wants the war. Nobody wants the economic consequences, even of the MAGA base. They're starting to eat away at that. You know, they're even starting to oppose in larger and larger numbers over time. So it just makes no sense. Politically, it makes no sense. Economically, it makes no sense. It doesn't make sense for U.S. power projection. It doesn't make sense in terms of Trump's personal investments in the Gulf region. None of it makes any sense. And yet they're still fighting it. And again, we have to ask this question, what do they have on this guy? What do they have on this guy? Because there's no reason. Like your intelligence community is arguing against it. Everyone in the military, all your generals who have opposed this war, just get rid of them, fire them, everything that is being done is just so stupid and is so in Israel's interests that it's just it begs the question as to what really is going down here and what evidence they have on these people. I mean, for people like Pete Hegseth, we know that, like, the David Horowitz Freedom Center gave him money and stuff. This guy's just a Fox News guy that just, drinks a lot, right? So this is not, people like him are not serious. But for the others, I mean, god damn. Like, it's to the point where J.D. Vance has come out and has to, do this half-assed criticism of Israel to try and save his political life, because I think his buddies like Peter Thiel, Palantir have discovered, we pumped a lot of money into J.D. Vance, so let's not ruin it by making him seem too pro-Israel. But of course, these Zionists don't actually care, because you can't you can't criticize them even a little bit. That's too much. Even a little bit. No, you need to be 100% with them, or else they don't accept it. And it's psychotic. So when we're looking at all of this and how it's escalating, the consequences are going to start to become way more transparent. We're seeing that there's a lot more happening now in terms of advancements on different fronts. And although the media is presenting this like, there's a lull in the fighting, not really, because Saudi oil facilities are getting blasted. So we're not actually experiencing much of a lull in the fighting here at this point. And even right now, more news is coming in about attacks on targets, Kurdish militia targets. So this is not over, and we're just being lied to. And I don't think anyone's buying it anymore, quite frankly. But that being said, we will be back. If you did get this far in the stream, do hit that like button. Make sure you add a comment. This helps us out in the algorithm. Of course, we do get censored here quite a bit at Mint Press. So please do share this video, hit that like and button, follow us. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell button so you do get the notifications. And we're going to continue to bring you all of the latest footage, the satellite imagery, everything that's coming out, break down these reports, and look a little bit deeper each time into these subjects and investigate what's actually going on here. So, do the job that the corporate media claims that it's doing, but of course is just lying for its teeth to you and celebrating war crimes. Typical. But we will be back here same time, same place on Thursday, of course. And for those of you, again, who got this far, we are looking for 300 new members so that we can keep this show alive. We can keep it on the air. We can keep bringing you all of the latest stories and analysis to keep you all up to date. And we do appreciate everybody that's been joining, all of your comments, everything because you are keeping the show alive. You are the reason why we're still here able to do this reporting, because there is people that are, of course, needing this information, wanting this information. And it helps you guys. It helps us, of course. So thank you to everybody for being here today. And we will be back on Thursday to cover the latest developments.